In today's episode of That Was Unexpected, we touch on the power of friendship. Three best friends talk about their journey, from teenagers who experienced a life-changing event together to adults whose careers have been shaped by this very event. Take it away, Lisa.
Are you sick of the same old disability stereotypes? We were too, so we did something about it. Welcome to That Was Unexpected, the Disability Lifestyle podcast for everyone. Brought to you by Young Care and hosted by me, Lisa Cox. Join our amazing guests as we delve into topics that don't often hit the headlines. So let's do this. Prepare for the unexpected. If you're low vision like me or have other accessibility requirements, check out our show notes. Before we get started, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of land on which we record. We pay respects to the elders, past, present and emerging.
So we've got three guests in the pod studio this morning. It's the first time that's ever happened. And to make it really tricky for me, my executive functioning will be getting work out. We have two Bens. So guys, can you please introduce yourselves for our audience?
Dr. Beer, I'll let you go first.
Sure. I'm Ben Beer. I'm a orthopaedic spinal surgeon based both at the Princess Alexandra Hospital and then I do my private work down the Gold Coast where I live with my three kids and beautiful wife. And I'm here because I've got a intimate knowledge of having had a very close friend go through a spinal injury and spinal cord injury about 21 years ago now. And that is Ben Harvey.
And that's me. I'm Ben Harvey. I am a C4, C5 incomplete quadriplegic. I had a rugby accident 10 days before my 16th birthday. So little 15-year-old, well, not too little, but running around playing rugby. And yeah, that's me. And I now live in Corinda with my wife, Melissa, and work for Forward Ability Support as a disability advocate and advisor. So working in-house to make the company more disability friendly and then getting out in the community to make the community a bit more disability literate.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, we definitely need some of that. And Tim, all the way over in Europe, hello. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you're up to? We can all nerd out on the research side of it.
Of course, yes. That's nice to be with you all. I'm Tim O'Shea. I'm currently in Salzburg, Austria, but I live in Boston, Massachusetts in the United States, and I'm an assistant professor in biomedical engineering and a spinal cord injury researcher at Boston University.
Thank you. Now, what I find really great about all of you guys is that you all went to school together and then Ben H acquired his disability. And from what I hear, you've all fallen into your respective professions because of that. So you weren't originally planning on a research career or a career in spinal surgery, but you've ended up doing that because of this lovely man here. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
For me personally, I think it was more a serendipity than anything else. I didn't really set out to be a spinal surgeon, even as long as maybe 3 years ago now. I was going to do hip and knee surgery and maybe some pelvic trauma, and I had a fellowship lined up to go to the United Kingdom and to do that after my orthopaedic training. And then there were a few things that changed, and then I guess there's always this gnawing voice in the back of your head of probably telling you what to do, and if you listen to it sometimes it tells you the right thing to do. And I ended up pretty much falling into two pretty excellent fellowships, one at the Princess Alexandra Hospital, doing mostly trauma but a very big variety of spinal surgeries, and then went down the Gold Coast to a relatively well-known spinal fellowship down there that's quite subspecialised, and that's where I've ended up staying and starting my private practice as well. So, yeah, I think I wasn't as clear on my goals as Tim was, but just serendipity that I fell into it.
That's really awesome. And what about you, Tim?
Yeah, so when I was about to graduate high school, I anticipated going into engineering, potentially being a mining engineer. I loved math and science, and it seemed like a pretty logical profession. And but when Ben had his accident, and I thought maybe biomedical engineering might be an interesting choice because I could still scratch that engineering itch, but maybe work on something like assistive technology or neuroprosthetics or exoskeleton, something kind of in the mechanical kind of space. But then during undergraduate, I was made aware of some research in the US that was focused on trying to regenerate spinal cords after injury with a focus on a reparative strategy. And that seemed really, really interesting. And I got really excited about that. And so I applied for a fellowship and was fortunate to get the fellowship, and applied to graduate school in the US and was fortunate to get into graduate school in the US. And I've kind of been on that path now since 2009. I've been in the US for 15 years, and I've just been making progress in the career trying to work on new treatments for spinal cord injury, and it's just something that I really enjoy doing, and it really want to make a career out of it.
That's fantastic. I don't know, there'll be a lot of people listening who are wanting to know more about the research, and I do as well. But I'll just go back to Ben for a little moment. Can you tell us a bit more about the injury, when it happened, how it happened, all of those sorts of things? I believe you're on the rugby field, is that right?
Yeah, so sorry I jumped in before you finished.
You're right.
Yeah, so we were just playing a bit of pre-season footy to get ready for the school season, and some of my mates had thrown a team together, so we went down and what was not a serious team, so I was playing footy, probably had a big night the night before, which didn't help. But yeah, the injury itself, I've spoken to other people that have had rugby accidents, and they all know exactly what happened. It was in the scrum, they felt the pop, it was a bad tackle. With me, I just ended up at, I don't know if you're familiar with rugby union, but there's a thing called a ruck, where once someone gets tackled, everyone gets in to try and get the ball back. So I ended up at the bottom of the ruck.
Mm-hmm.
8 forward, I was a forward, 8 forwards from each team trying to get at the ball. I'm at the bottom of the ruck with 16 boys on top of me, and I think just lying at that funny angle with enough weight caused the injury. Everyone else got up, and I remember being the last person at the bottom of the ruck, and I knew then, I was like, I can't get up. In a unfortunate thing, I was pretty lucky. The ref was an emergency physician, so he knew straight away, this is bad.
Yep.
Don't move him. And yeah, called the ambulance, and I was off to the PA hospital.
Which is where you're working now, Ben. So you'd see quite a few people every year through with either not similar injuries from rugby, but all sorts of injuries caused from all sorts of things. But what's the main demographic that you see?
The main demographic is it's hard to put a just pick out one. Generally speaking, there's sort of two modes of distribution. There's the young males who tend to engage in higher risk activities, and then for spinal fractures, but not necessarily spinal cord injuries. There's an older demographic of patients with osteoporosis that get fractures as well. So usually women, but also men in that older age bracket.
Yeah.
But it does touch almost every part of society. There's young women, older women, middle-aged men. It doesn't really matter. Occasionally a child, but they're usually taken to a different hospital, but I'm aware of those patients as well that also get potential spinal cord injuries. So it's a wide variety of people.
Okay. And prior to all of this, all three of you, did you know much about disability, have disability in your life through school or friends or family?
I'll go first. There was a guy that we all went to school with that he had a spinal injury a couple of years before mine. So it was funny when I had my accident, I was like, oh God, I've done a Nick Hanley, because but then also my grandfather, this is actually a pretty spooky story. My grandfather, we share a birthday.
Yep.
He was a pretty good soccer player when he was a teenager. He was trialing out for the state team. He was on the team, but they put him back on to basically give some of the other boys a trial. He got a kick in the heart, ended up with a stroke at 15 and was paralysed down one side of his body his whole life. So
Far out.
I grew up with my grandfather. He was actually quite an inspiration for me because he was paralysed down one side, but he didn't let any of that stop him. Like, he'd be down in the shed building like ladders, and he taught himself how to ride a bike. He could drive. He used to drive me to school as a primary school student. So I think that probably helped with my rehab, because I was like, well, stuff happens, deal with it. I just had to censor myself then. I was going to say another word, but yeah, Popper dealt with his and lived a pretty full life. So time for me to suck it up, and yeah.
And what about you, Ben?
I'd say reflecting back on it, which is a long time ago now, but I would say that I didn't really have much to do with disability or know much about it, apart from knowing about Nick Hanley, and he was sort of a family friend of ours, but it just didn't touch me closely. And then I wouldn't say that I was aware of, apart from a few people that I went to school with throughout, unless they had a very obvious disability, being in a wheelchair or having a medical condition that was so obvious, I wouldn't have known much about disability before that, which I think has improved a lot. And I don't know whether that's just because now I'm older and I see more of that, but certainly my children are aware of disability, and that probably is helped by the fact that we have such a close friend that's in a wheelchair, that they get to have that awareness. But I actually think in society there's probably more awareness around disability now than there was certainly back then. But obviously with, much more gains to be made.
Yeah, well said. I've certainly seen my nieces and nephews seeing a lot more disability in mainstream pop culture generally than I did when I was that age, but there's still a long, long way to go. And what about you, Tim? Did you have much to do with disability pre all of your fantastic work now?
I didn't have anything to do with spinal cord injury or know much about spinal cord injury before Ben's accident. We had a friend in late primary school, early high school that unfortunately had childhood brain cancer, and he started to deteriorate pretty quickly and had significant disabilities over the course of the year he was suffering from that disease, and so that was pretty traumatic. I'd say it was a very young age, seeing someone deteriorate in front of your eyes and seeing that kind of effect on how it affects people. So that's an early memory that I have of someone with disabilities that definitely sticks with me. Yeah. But in terms of spinal cord injury, Nick Hanley was someone who had an injury that we all knew of, but I didn't really know a lot about spinal cord injury. Yep. When Nick had it, it wasn't like didn't personally affect me in a way that Ben's accident did. I feel like the people who are really close to someone who suffers a spinal cord injury know a lot more about the details associated with an injury that people don't necessarily in the public know. So people see people in wheelchairs and they think, oh, they can't walk, or they maybe have issues with hand function. But then there's all the other things that go into dealing with a spinal cord injury: bowel and bladder, sexual dysfunction, those things that people don't see. And I think until you know someone with spinal cord injury, you're not really aware of those things.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And everyone's different. Everyone with spinal cord injuries is different. So what's happening for one won't be happening for another, I suppose. But okay, so following on from, I suppose, what you've all sort of said about disability, what are the biggest misconceptions you think people have about spinal cord injury and disability? from your perspectives as both someone with spinal cord injury and as a surgeon and a researcher in the field?
I'll start with this one. I think just going on from what you just said about, everyone's an individual, I think that's probably the biggest misconception, is that everyone fits in one box with a disability. Everyone is an individual, and I think both from an individual standpoint, as the person with, who may have just acquired a disability, as well as their family, and then even from a society point of view and externally, is that each one of those people is an individual with different difficulties, but also with different abilities, and it's both harder than it is and easier. Sorry, harder than it looks and easier than it looks. So it's not, your life's not over when you acquire a disability. There's lots of things that you can do, and you can live a very fulfilled life with a disability. And when you're early on, you might not be seeing that because you're mostly grieving. But then from the outside looking in, some people might think, oh, that person's life's so hard and so difficult. But if you get to know them individually, you'll actually think, well, what a great life they're living. You're working, you've got a wife, you've got a family. There's so many good parts, and everyone has difficulties in their life. Some difficulties are much harder than others, and pretty much every person, there's always one person, at least one person that's got it harder than you do. And I think that's the thing that you kind of don't realise, and people don't realise early on, is that there are people that have it harder, and you can just have a fulfilled life by getting on with it and moving on and focusing on what you can do.
Yeah, well said. We'll get that printed on a T-shirt, I think. I really like that. And then what?
I guess Tim touched on it earlier. This might be more spinal cord specific, but people see me and think, oh, isn't it, he can't walk. But I was lucky knowing Nick Hanley, and there was a guy we were actually playing with on the day. His older brother also had spinal injury playing rugby. So they were both very important people to me in the early days of my accident, and they came up to see me and they were like, forget the walking. The hardest thing for you is going to be bladder and bowel. And I guess knowing that early on prepared me for that, because people see, oh, he can't walk, but it's also like managing your bowel and bladder is not easy with a spinal injury. And then disability in general, access is getting a lot better with there being more accessible bathrooms and stuff in the population. But then the next problem is getting people that are able-bodied to stop using those bathrooms, because we need them, and sometimes people are less continent than others, and if you're in a rush and you need to go, you need to go. And if someone's just in the bath because they didn't want to do a poo around other people,
accessible bathrooms are not for you on a shopping trolley whatever the reason. But so that was the biggest challenge you found when you nearly acquired the disability?
Look, it probably wasn't the biggest challenge, but it would have been if I didn't know. And as Beery touched on, knowing that you can go on to live a full life afterwards, it probably took me a little bit longer to realise that.
Yeah.
And I think having people know, like me, I'm married, I have a job, I live with my wife, I'm not in a facility. There's a lot of people out there like that.
Yeah. And I think people like yourself, it's so awesome for all our audience and everybody to know that you can lead a really fulfilled life and do pretty normal things. Get married, have a job, go grocery shopping, all those sorts of things that we don't see represented. Tim, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about your research. Can you explain it to me, but the non-academic version, please?
Sure, I'll do my best. I'll just kind of provide some context. So I work in a biomedical engineering department. So my lab is filled with people who are biomedical engineers with a focus and interest in developing new materials. So new biomedical materials, so things that look kind of like Jello or look like little nanoparticles that you can barely see. So oftentimes it just looks like a clear solution. But we're trying to develop different material-based strategies to try and enhance or make better the regeneration that can take place in the spinal cord after injury. And the way we're trying to do that is to guide the functions of some special cells that are in the spinal cord. So in your brain and spinal cord, there are kind of two populations of cells that we kind of categorize. So there's the neurons. Those are the ones that make the neural circuits that kind of transmit the information that allow you to kind of feel things and to move your arms and legs and your fingers. But then there's these other cells as well in the brain and spinal cord called glial cells. And those cells essentially do everything else, and they support the functions of these neural circuits. Now, after an injury to a brain or spinal cord, those cells just don't have the ability to mount a wound response in the same kind of way that you can have a wound response happen in like the skin. For example, you cut your skin, a certain type of skin injury, you will get repair of that skin, and you'll look at your cut in a few days after you've injured it, and you may not even know that you even had a cut there. In the spinal cord, you have an injury to that tissue, and the cells, the glial cells, the neurons, don't have the ability to mount a similar type of wound response. So instead, you get this kind of fibrotic scarring take place. So scar, if you have a really big skin injury, you can see a persistent scar. It's the kind of same kind of thing in the spinal cord. You have this persistent scar. And that just creates an environment that won't allow the circuits to repair. And so what we're trying to do is to essentially enhance the ability for the glial cells in the spinal cord to do this wound repair so that we can get this more effective recovery of neural tissue in the environment that was damaged. And we do that research using materials as the way to stimulate the glial cells to do this repair. And we do all our research in what are called preclinical models. So these are in animal models where we're really trying to understand the kind of cell-based understanding of what's going on. We look to see whether or not our animals recover any kind of function as part of that intervention. But we're really looking at kind of fundamental biology in the research I do. Given the kind of constraints we have, that's kind of where we can make the biggest impact. And we work with collaborators who are working in various areas of spinal cord injury research to help amplify our outputs. And I'm really excited about the research that we're doing. We're a long way from being able to say, Ben, come jump on the operating table, and another Ben here inject this material and apply the treatment. But we're learning new things every day, and we're kind of pushing forward, trying to search for an approach that will improve outcomes.
I think that's absolutely brilliant what you're doing, and it's exciting for people with spinal cord injuries. I know that's your focus, but what focus do you think there is, or what ability is there to affect, say, brain injury or something like that with this technology?
Yeah, definitely. So our approaches we apply and study in spinal cord injury, but we also study them in the context of ischemic stroke and hemorrhagic stroke, which many people experience in the brain, which causes similar types of tissue injuries. We don't work actively in like repetitive traumatic brain injury work, but similar strategies are being applied in models of TBI, or traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
And these cells are similarly affected. So you have an injury to that tissue, it won't be able to mount a natural repair response to recover that function. And so interventions that augment the cell's ability to do that can be applied in various types of brain and spinal cord injuries.
Okay, and you live in Boston, you're currently in Europe, But is there anything similar that you're aware of happening in Australia?
Yeah, so there's a number of researchers working in Australia in many areas related to spinal cord injury. In fact, at the moment, I'm in Salzburg at the essentially the it's a foundation that supports spinal cord injury research called the Wings for Life, and it's an organization that's come out of the Red Bull, the energy drink company. The founder of Red Bull had a good friend whose son and brother had a spinal cord injury in a car accident, and he was very enthusiastic about supporting research that would potentially be able to push us forward for a cure. And many people have kind of seen the World Run initiative that they do to raise money for spinal cord injury research, and it's such a great organization in a number of ways. And just one way that I think it's particularly nice is that the Red Bull organization supports all the overhead costs to run the foundation. So every bit of money that you raise from the run or that gets donated goes directly to the researchers to support research, which is a really awesome initiative that we're very thankful that it exists. And it's really been able to push the research forward across many different areas. But suffice to say, there's also Australians at this conference. So there's a UQ professor, Mark Rutenberg, who does a lot of work in spinal cord injury. There's professors from University of New South Wales that are working in the rehab space. There's also people in Brisbane at Griffith University working on spinal cord injury by the government and the Perry Cross Foundation. So there's people who are pushing us forward in many different areas, and many people collaborate together to try and reach a common goal. We all have the same kind of goal for what we want to achieve, and we're taking different strategies to get there, but we work together when we can to push forward on that common goal.
No, it's awesome to see, especially the big corporates like Red Bull getting on board to support this, because it's unfortunate that we see a bit of a divide between medical research and corporates. They don't have an awful lot to do with each other. So when I do hear about things like that, it's great. So are you guys back to playing rugby these days, and Ben and Tim back playing rugby at all, or no?
I played for a while, just like most early to middle-aged men. I stopped playing when I started working properly. It was a bit hard to justify attending the hospital on a Monday morning with a black eye or a bruised something, and then trying to get over that during the week. So I gave up essentially when I started working in about 2012.
But you both did go back pretty after my accident.
Yeah, I played for a long time. I think it was even though we had a very close friend go through something like that. It was call it youthful exuberance or something, or maybe just the fact that you think you're 10 foot tall and bulletproof when you're young, that it couldn't possibly happen to you, even when it's happened to someone you know very well.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever really thought about, that it could happen to me, even with that. So it didn't really factor in from my memory of going back to play rugby.
Well, that's the thing. Like when I first had my accident, people are like, "Oh, what happened?" And you say, "Oh, a rugby accident." And they're like, "Oh, bloody rugby," but it's not that common. Like I was the only person in the spinal unit with a rugby accident. If you were going to ask me what the key demographic was for a spinal injury, it would be young guys on motorbikes and New Zealand tourists diving into sandbanks on the Gold Coast. Like, yeah, there would have been at least 3 or 4 guys come through while I was there that had driving too fast on their motorbikes on the highway, and then a couple of Kiwis that had dove into a sandbank.
I definitely agree with that. It's the motorbike accidents, the pool injuries, or just engaging in some high risk activity like a big trampoline flip or something silly that you think you can do it one stage and you find out you can't. It's a pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah.
Probably the last demographic's the over 50-year-old up a ladder when they shouldn't be.
Ah, yes. Hello, Dad, if you're listening, get off the ladders. But I think that's a common experience that a lot of us who've acquired disabilities. It'll never happen to me, and we're proved very wrong.
Tim went back and he had a pretty, not as bad as mine, but he also had a bad injury the same year, which may have spurred on his desire to get into the study because he spent a lot more time at the hospital with me than the others because of his arm was in a sling.
So he wasn't able to play and could visit you instead.
Yeah.
That would have been great having that support from a mate really early on.
I had it from all of them. Like, even like, basically, I think, Tim, you say that when the boys were going to rugby training, you'd come up to see me instead.
It was a very crazy week that week, because I remember it like it's very vivid in my mind, right? So Ben has his accident on the Sunday. We find about it on MSN Messenger Sunday night, as one was to do around that time. You know, everyone's posting messages like thinking of Ben and all that kind of thing. Ben Beer and myself, we were taken up to the hospital, the PA hospital, on Monday to go and see Ben. And Ben was obviously in the ICU and he wasn't able to be seen by anybody, but we were taken up and we got to see Doug. And
it's my dad.
Doug was in a lot of shock. And like it was, I just remember that sitting there in that waiting room, and that was a very vivid memory. And then like that afternoon, I'm getting driven up to the Sunshine Coast to go and play rugby for a trial for the first 15. And then that Saturday, we're playing at Ashgrove and I dislocate my shoulder. And so that was essentially my season done. And on the Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, rather than going to rugby training, my mum would pick me up from Terrace and she'd drive me up to the PA hospital and I'd hang out with Ben for a couple of hours and then mum would pick me back up and we'd go home, we'd have dinner. And I feel like those times, in that very early time, you see a lot of the realities of a spinal cord injury, but then also you see this recovery trajectory that happens very early on, where like every week you'd go up and Ben would be like, oh, I've gotten something, this is gotten better, or, you know, I'm able to sit up and do this, and look what I was able to do at PT and OT. So that was also something that I remember fondly, because I'm like, you know, there is this trajectory, this natural recovery trajectory that people do have. So like this initial injury that you have, things can come back and we don't really know how people are going to be permanently affected by these injuries. So you just got to do the hard work and stay optimistic, and keep it up. So yeah, that was just that was that kind of a weird kind of time. But I definitely remember those times very vividly.
And I believe you two, Ben Beer and Tim, both, I was going to say bridesmaids, groomsmen. Groomsmen at your wedding, Ben.
That's right. I had Timmy made the trek back from Boston last year to be there for the wedding. My best man standing right next to me, and then I had Beery as part of the extended crew. I've got a very close crew. I think it was at 5. Yeah.
You don't remember?
Mate,
it was only 6 months ago.
It feels like longer. Yeah, edit that out. Sorry, Mel. No. But yeah, so they've been in my life for a very long time, and I'm very fortunate to have the group of friends that I do. One of my other very close friends, who was also in the bridal party, Matt Roberts, he went on to, he's now a urologist, and at the time when I was fresh out of hospital, I used to have a lot of urinary tract infections and bladder issues, and so that's why Matt got into urology. So it's not just Ben and Tim. Matt's also jumped into his career to try and fix things. So yeah, very lucky.
Oh, good to hear. I know that before we started recording, we were talking about you going in to visit other spinal cord patients with a fresh injury, and you mentioned that you hadn't really done much of that, and knowing a bit about your story, that you were just getting on with life, you got married, you were working, and you were doing really ordinary things like grocery shopping, that was really powerful. You're like, oh, but I'm not a this or that, I've done nothing special. But that's the point. You're living a really ordinary, normal life. And when we have newly acquired injuries, we sort of think nothing is ever going to be the same again. I'll never work, I'll never get married, I'll never this, that, and the other. And you're doing all of that. So I think it's really powerful if you did go in to speak with other people, even if, you're not Prime Minister or something like that. You don't have to be.
Not yet.
Give him time.
You'd have to get over your fear of public speaking.
Mate, what's this?
So what prognosis, or what did they say to you initially when you had a newly acquired injury?
Well, it wasn't great. The first thing, because with spines, you'll probably say, like, with a spinal injury, they don't give a prognosis because it's pretty unknown. But I was ventilated after my surgery, and that's probably why when Tim says he went up and Doug was a bit shocked, I think it's because the doctors pulled him aside and was like, "Oh, your son's on a ventilator." And Dad was like, "Oh, yeah, no, he's just been out of surgery. Of course he is." And they're like, "No, your son's on a ventilator, and this could be as good as it gets because like C4-5 is a pretty high level injury." So, I could have been ventilated for the rest of my life, but I'm just fortunate that I have a very weird, incomplete injury and I've had a lot of recovery. So,
yeah. And tell me, I'll dig more into your personal life. Excuse me, I'm just nosy. So if we can talk about the research, I can talk about your personal life. How'd you meet your wife?
Well, I think with a lot of push from Beery and the rest of the boys, because I think you were a bit worried that I was getting left behind.
Yep. I definitely remember that conversation when I think Tim was back or was about to leave, and we were having that conversation about what the next 10 years might hold, and that Ben was at risk of being left behind and being stuck in a forever rehabilitation cycle. And we sort of had some pretty hard conversations around it's not you're not going to walk again. You got to that's not the goal here. The goals are be independent, live a normal life, get a job, get some direction, that sort of thing. And that was probably when we were about 24, 25 maybe.
Yeah, it probably took me a few years to really sink in, but got on the apps as you do. Because it's when was it? 2021.
Yep.
I think Melissa and I first met on the apps. That was it was interesting because I was like, well, what do I do? Do I not mention having a disability and then match with people and then be like, by the way, and then, I guess it was almost a bit of a defense mechanism. Are they just going to disappear?
Yeah.
I put a little, what I thought was a pretty witty bio that I BYO chair. Rugby ruined my stand-up career, so looking for a new one. And then I used, there's a lot of apps out there now. My app of choice was Hinge.
Mm-hmm.
And so Hinge, you can put prompts on your photos, and I'm not quite sure why I put this prompt on this photo in particular, but it was guess the backstory to this photo, and it was a picture of me and a good friend of mine that had joined me at a wedding as my plus one because, at this point I didn't have a proper plus one. So,
yeah. But
then I was like, oh, she might not want her face out on the app. So I photoshopped. It wasn't great, but I put Gal Gadot, Wonder Woman, her face on top of our good friend Angela's face. So it was me and Wonder Woman at the wedding, and it was guess the backstory to this photo. And so Mel's obviously matched with me, and she's read my bio that I think I'm a bit funny. So she's gone high risk, high reward. And her first message to me was, is it Wonder Woman and Superman, the Christopher Reeve years? And I was like, that's the greatest thing I've ever heard. And I think it was love at first swipe because I think it comes with you probably can agree, you do have a bit of dark humor at times.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a perk. I call it.
Yep.
I know that I call it a cripple perk, and I'm allowed to say that word because I am one.
Go for it.
yeah.
It's the sort of humour that only people who have a disability or are close to a person with a disability tend to have, because other people tend to shy away from those sort of fairly politically incorrect jokes. But with, when you've been around it for so long, it's almost just part of your repertoire with your friend who's in that situation.
We hope you enjoyed part 1 of The Power of Friendship. Listen to part 2 to hear more about how this heartwarming friendship is changing lives. Part 2 will be released in a couple of weeks.
Thanks for listening to That Was Unexpected. If you liked what you heard and you want to hear more, then hit subscribe wherever you get your fix. Have any questions or topics that you'd love for us to tackle? Great! Email podcast@youngcare.com.au. We can't wait to hear from you. Check out our show notes for transcripts, video recordings, and to find out more about our guests, plus the useful resources they share. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn at YoungCareOz. Let's not forget, an inclusive community is everyone's business. So let's keep working together to break down barriers and smash some stereotypes.